3. Habermeyer. Actually, no one was around when Yossarian returned from the hospital but Orr and the dead man in Yossarian's tent. The dead man in Yossarian's tent was a pest, and Yossarian didn't like him, even though he had never seen him. Having him lying around all day annoyed Yossarian so much that he had gone to the orderly room several times to complain to Sergeant Towser, who refused to admit that the dead man existed, which, of course, he no longer did. It was still more frustrating to try to appeal directly to Major, the long and bony squadron commander, who looked a little bit like Henry Fonda in distress and went out jumping out the window of his office each time Yossarian bullied his way past Sergeant Towser to speak to him about it. The dead man in Yossarian's tent was simply not easy to live with. He even disturbed Orr, who was not easy to live with either, and who, on the day Yossarian came back, was tinkering with the faucet that fed gasoline into the stove he had started building while Yossarian was in the hospital. "What are you doing?" Yossarian asked guardedly when he entered the tent, although he saw at once. "There's a leak here," Orr said. "I'm trying to fix it." "Please stop it," Yossarian said. "You're making me nervous." "When I was a kid," Orr replied, "I used to walk around all day with crab apples in my cheeks, one in each cheek." Yossarian put away the musette bag from which he had begun removing his toilet articles and braced himself suspiciously. A minute passed. "Why?" he found himself forced to ask finally. Orr tittered triumphantly. "Because they're better than horse chestnuts," he answered. Orr was kneeling on the floor of the tent. He worked without pause, taking the faucet apart, spreading all the tiny pieces out carefully, counting, and then studying each one interminably, as though he had never seen anything remotely similar before, and then reassembling the whole small apparatus over and over and over again. With no loss of patience, no sign of fatigue, no indication of ever concluding, Yossarian watched him tinkering and felt certain he would be compelled to murder him in cold blood if he did not stop. His eyes moved towards the hunting knife that had been slung over the mosquito net bar by the dead man, and the day he arrived, the knife hung beside the dead man's empty leather gun holster from which Habermeyer had stolen the gun. When I couldn't get crab apples," Orr continued, "I used horse chestnuts. Horse chestnuts are about the same size as crab apples and actually have a better shape, although the shape doesn't matter a bit." "Why did you walk around with crab apples in your cheeks?" Yossarian asked again. "That's what I asked." "Because they've got a better shape than horse chestnuts," Orr answered. "I just told you that." "Why?" swore Yossarian at him approvingly. "You evil-eyed, mechanically aptitude disaffiliated son of a bitch, did you walk around with anything in your cheeks?" "I didn't," Orr said, "walk around with anything in my cheeks. I walked around with crab apples in my cheeks. When I couldn't get crab apples, I walked around with horse chestnuts in my cheeks." Orr giggled. Yossarian made up his mind to keep his mouth shut, and did. Orr waited. Yossarian waited longer. "One in each cheek," Orr said. "Why?" Orr pounced. "Why? What?" Yossarian shook his head smiling and refused to say. "It's a funny thing about this valve," Orr mused aloud. "What is?" Yossarian asked. "Because I wanted..." Yossarian knew. "Jesus Christ, why did you want apple cheeks?" "Apple cheeks?" Yossarian demanded. "I wanted apple cheeks," Orr repeated. "Even when I was a kid, I wanted apple cheeks someday, and I decided to work at it until I got them, and by God, I did work at it until I got them, and that's how I did it, with crab apples in my cheeks all day long." He giggled again. "One in each cheek." "Why did you want apple cheeks?" "I didn't want apple cheeks," Orr said. "I wanted big cheeks. I didn't care about the color so much, but I wanted them big. I just worked at it. Just like one of those crazy guys you read about who go around squeezing rubber balls all day long just to strengthen their hands. In fact, I was one of those crazy guys. I used to walk around with rubber balls in my hands too. Why? Why what? Why did you walk around with rubber balls in your hands? Because rubber balls, said Orr, are better than crab apples? Orr sniggered and shook his head. I did it to protect my good reputation in case anyone ever caught me walking around with crab apples in my cheeks. With rubber balls in my hands, I could deny there were crab apples in my cheeks. Every time someone asked me why I was walking around with crab apples in my cheeks, I just opened my hands and showed them it was rubber balls I was walking around with, not crab apples, and that they were in my hands, not in my cheeks. And it was good story. But I never knew if it got across or not, since it's pretty tough to make people understand you when you're talking to them with 2 crab apples in your cheeks. Yossarian found it pretty tough to understand him then, and he wondered once again if Orr wasn't talking to him with the tip of his tongue in one of his apple cheeks. Yossarian decided not to utter another word. It would be futile. He knew Orr. He knew there was not a chance in hell of finding out from him why he wanted big cheeks. It would do no more good to ask him than it had done to ask him why that whore had kept beating him over the head with her shoe that morning in Rome in the cramped vestibule outside the open door of Nately's whore's kid sister's room. She was a tall, strapping girl with long hair and incandescent blue veins converging populously beneath her coca-colored skin where the flesh was most tender. And she kept cursing and shrieking and jumping high into the air on her bare feet to keep right on hitting him on the top of his head with her spiked heel of her shoe. They were both naked and raising a rumpus that brought everyone in the apartment of the hall to watch. Each couple in a bedroom doorway, all of them naked, except the aproned and sweatered old woman, who clucked reprovingly, and the lecherous, dissipated old man, who cackled about hilariously, though the whole episode was a kind of avid and superior glee. The girl shrieked, and Orr giggled, and each time she landed with the heel of her shoe, Orr giggled louder, infuriating her more still further, so that she flew up higher in the air for another shot at his noodle, her wondrously full breast soaring all over the place like billowing pennants in a strong wind, and her buttocks and strong thighs shimmying this way and that way like some horrifying bonanza. She shrieked, and Orr giggled, right up to the time she shrieked and knocked him cold with a good solid crack on the temple that made him stop giggling and sent him off to the hospital in a stretcher with a hole in his head that wasn't very deep and a very mild concussion that kept him out of combat only 12 days. Nobody could find out what happened, not even the cackling old man and the clucking old woman, who were in a position to find out everything that happened in that vast and endless brothel, with its multitudinous bedrooms on facing sides of the narrow hallways going off in opposite directions from the spacious sitting room with its shaded windows and single lamp. Every time she met Orr after that, she'd hoist her skirt up over her tight, white, elastic panties and, jeering coarsely, bulge her firm, round belly out at him. Cursing him with contemptuous and roaring, husky laughter as she saw him giggling fearfully and taking refuge behind Yossarian. Whatever he had done, or tried to do, or failed to do, behind the closed door of Nately's whore's kid sister's room was still a secret. The girl wouldn't tell Nately's whore, or any of the other whores, or Nately, or Yossarian. Orr might tell, but Yossarian had decided not to utter another word. Do you want to know why I wanted big cheeks? Orr asked. Yossarian kept his mouth shut. Do you remember that time in Rome when that girl you can't stand you kept hitting me over the head with the heel of her shoe? Do you want to know why she was hitting me? It was still impossible to imagine what he could have done to make her angry enough to hammer him over the head for 15 or 20 minutes, yet not angry enough to pick him up by the ankles and dash his brains out. She was certainly tall enough, and Orr was certainly short enough. or had buck teeth and bulging eyes to go with his big cheeks, and was even smaller than young Hupple, who lived on the wrong side of the railroad tracks in a tent in the administration area in which Hungry Joe lay screaming in his sleep every night. The administration area in which Hungry Joe had pitched his tent by mistake lay in the center of the squadron between the ditch with its rusted railroad tracks and tilted black bituminous road The men could pick up girls along that road if they promised to take them wherever they wanted to go. Buxom, young, homely, grinning girls with missing teeth, whom they could drive off the road and lie down in the wild grass with, and Concern did whenever he could, which was not nearly as often as Hungry Joe, who could get a jeep but couldn't drive, begged him to try. The tents of the enlisted men in the squadron stood on the other side of the road, alongside the open-air movie theater, in which, for the daily amusement of dying, ignorant armies clashed by night on a collapsible screen, and to which another USO troop came that same afternoon. The USO troops were sent by General P.P. Peckham, who had moved his headquarters up to Rome and had nothing better to do while he schemed against General Dreedle. General Peckham was a general with whom neatness definitely counted. He was a spry, suave, and very precise general who knew the circumference of the equator and always wrote enhanced when he meant increase. He was a prick, and no one knew this better than General Dreedle, who was incensed by General Peckham's recent directive requiring all tents in the Mediterranean theater of operations to be pitched along parallel lines with entrances facing back proudly toward the Washington Monument. To General Dreedle, who ran a fighting outfit, it seemed a lot of crap. Furthermore, it was none of General Peckham's goddamn business how the tents in General Dreedle's wing were pitched. Then there followed a hectic jurisdictional dispute between these overlords that was decided in General Dreedle's favor by ex-PFC Wintergreen, mail clerk at 27th Air Force Headquarters. Wintergreen determined the outcome by throwing all communications from General Peckham into the wastebasket. He found them too prolix. General Dreedle's views, expressed in less pretentious literary style, pleased ex-PFC Wintergreen, and were sped along by him. In his zealous observance of regulations, General Dreedle was victorious by default. To regain whatever status he had lost, General Peckham began sending out more USO troops than he had ever sent out before, and assigned to Colonel Cargill himself the responsibility of generating enough enthusiasm for them. But there was no enthusiasm in Yossarian's group. In Yossarian's group, there was only a mounting number of enlisted men and officers who found their way solemnly to Sergeant Towser several times a day to ask if the orders sending them home had come in. There were men who had finished their 50 munitions. There were more of them now than when Yossarian had gone into the hospital, and they were still waiting. They worried and bit their nails. They were grotesque, like useless young men in a depression. They moved sideways like crabs. They were waiting for orders sending them home to safely return from the 27th Air Force Headquarters in Italy. And while they waited, they had nothing to do but worry and bite their nails and find their way solemnly to Sergeant Towser several times a day to ask if orders sending them home to safety had come. They were in a race and knew it, because they knew from bitter experience that Colonel Cathcart might raise the number of missions again at any time. They had nothing better to do than wait. Only Hungry Joe had something better to do each time he finished his missions. He had screaming nightmares and won fistfights with Hupple's cat. He took his camera to the front row of every USO show and tried to shoot pictures up the skirt of the yellow-headed singer with two big ones in a sequin dress that always seemed ready to burst. The pictures never came out. Colonel Cargill, General Peckham's troubleshooter, was a forceful, ruddy man. Before the war, he had been an alert, hard-hitting, aggressive marketing executive. He was a very bad marketing executive. Colonel Cargill was so awful a marketing executive that his services were much sought after by firms eager to establish losses for tax purposes. Throughout the civilized world, from Battery Park to Fulton Street, he was known as a dependable man for fast tax write-off. His prices were high, for failure often did not come easily. He had to start at the top and work his way down. With sympathetic friends in Washington, losing money was no simple matter. It took months of hard work and careful misplanning. A person misplaced, disorganized, miscalculated, overlooked everything, and opened every loophole. And just when he thought he had it made, the government gave him a lake or a forest or an oil field and spoiled everything. Even with such handicaps, Colonel Cargill could be relied on to run the most prosperous enterprise into the ground. He was a self-made man who owed his lack of success to nobody. Men, Colonel Cargill began in Yossarian's squadron, measuring his pauses carefully. You're American soldiers. The officers of no other army in the world can make that statement. Think about it. Sergeant Knight thought about it and then politely informed Colonel Cargill that he was addressing the enlisted men and that the officers were to be found waiting for him on the other side of the squadron. Colonel Cargill thanked him crisply and glowed with self-satisfaction as he strode across the area. It made him proud to observe that 29 months in the service had not blunted his genius for ineptitude. Men! He began his address to the officers, measuring his pauses carefully. You're American officers. The officers of no other army in the world can make that statement. Think about it. He waited a moment to permit them to think about it. These people are your guests, he shouted suddenly. They've traveled over 30,000 miles to entertain you. How are you going to feel if nobody wants to get out and watch them? What's going to happen to their morale? Now, men, it's no skin off my behind, but that girl who wants to play the accordion for you today is old enough to be a mother. How would you feel if your own mother traveled over 30,000 miles to play the accordion for some troops that didn't want to watch her? How is that kid whose mother that accordion player is old enough to be going to feel when he grows up and learns about it? We all know the answer to that one. Now, men, don't misunderstand me. This is all voluntary. Of course, I'd be the last colonel in the world to order you go to that USO show and have a good time, but I want every one of you who isn't sick enough to be in the hospital to go to that USO show right now and have a good time, and that's an order.